find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on
Welcome
a
to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy, and hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, tell folks the title of today's episode.
My mother abandoned me when I was 16. An interview with Paula Cope.
Yeah, and we just finished that interview, and Paula is a personal friend of ours and has an amazing story to tell, and we're both verklempt, if you know that word. We're both saying, all right, we have to get through this intro without, weeping. It was just beautiful.
I just spent the past 10 minutes crying, so yeah. My eyes look a little red, that's why.
Just a beautiful, well, she's a wonderful person, and her story of resilience is just amazing, and of course fits in very well with the themes that we've been doing in these podcasts, especially since I wrote the book that just came out a little over a month ago.
You mean Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again?
That's the very book I was referring to. How amazing that you just figured that out instantly like that. Yeah, that's the book that I just came out with, and we've been following up that theme, betrayal and forgiveness.
Yes, we have.
And as I mentioned, and I mentioned in the interview with Paul as well, I don't like to promise, guests before they actually appear, but we have scheduled for next week someone who's actually internationally known as an expert on estrangement.
Right.
And he's written a book, and we'll talk about that. I trust that will happen next week. I don't count my chickens until they hatch. But this interview with Paula fits in that theme very well. Her story is just, I think you found, incredibly inspiring and moving. And, when she talks about, I'm going to start crying again, the angels in her life that helped her and got her to where she is. And speaking of people who are very well known internationally, she is a internationally known management consultant and organization expert, and a wonderful person. So stay tuned for that interview. Before we get there, we've already mentioned my book that's just out. Let's mention your book.
Okay.
Yep.
That would be The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
And in Blue Tent Erotic Tales of the Bible news, it is now available, the audiobook is now available in a zillion different places that it wasn't available before. It used to be just available through Amazon. It's still available there, but now it's available a lot of other places. I just happened to listen to it on Spotify the other day. So do check that out.
And on Spotify, you can check it out.
And at some point, you'll be able to find that book in more than just Amazon. Right now, the book itself, the paperback and the ebook, are both available through Amazon. So do check that out as well. Beautiful erotica written by Laria Zilber, who just happens to be Judy's pseudonym. So, or just happens to be Judy, I guess that's the way I would put that. I also can't resist mentioning today happens to be Judy's birthday. So
yes, it is.
Happy birthday,
Thank
Judy,
you.
and I guess happy birthday, Laria, too, although I haven't talked to Laria about it, but happy birthday, Judy.
Laria probably has a different birthday.
One never knows.
You never know. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So let's get on with our interview, and we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Paula Cope. Paula grew up in Brooklyn and moved to Vermont at the age of 16 to attend the University of Vermont as an emancipated minor. When she hit adulthood, she spent 18 years as a physical therapist before getting her master's in education and switching into organization development. For the past 33 years, she has owned her own management consulting and training company, doing business in 32 states, 3 countries, and for governments of all sizes. Now, on the exit ramp of retirement, Paula is working on a book with her daughter on creative parenting. Paula has written dozens of memoirs and short stories. In February 2024, Paula won her first story slam describing her unanticipated estrangement from her mother. Paula, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we are delighted. And we should tell our listeners, we know you.
Yes, Paula is a good personal friend and a woman of whom I am in awe with all your accomplishments and everything that you do. So
Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah. Happy
And
to be here.
So what occasions are inviting you at this particular juncture in the stuff that we've been talking about is that, and it's funny, I'm always hesitant to promise something that isn't happening yet, but I will say next week we have scheduled an expert who's just written a book about estrangement. And I've just written a book, as our listeners generally know, and as I know you know, Paul, I've just written a book on betrayal and forgiveness.
Mhm.
And so we were thinking about, gee, who do we know who might have some relevant stories? Now, you have fabulous stories about a billion different things. I'm going to put in a plug for your book, which I haven't even read yet, because I don't think you finished it yet. But
Correct.
your book on creative parenting is the stories you tell about that.
Yes, it is.
That's worth
And you
another
have
episode.
three fabulous kids that
Thank
are
you.
talented
Thank you.
and creative and just have such diverse personalities and just such interesting people. So I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
But we're here to ask you about, in particular, it was the beginning of that bio. It's like you moved to Vermont at 16 as an emancipated minor, which is already I think a pretty interesting story. And of course, there's a story of estrangement in there. So I am curious. Please tell us about that.
Sure. So I was growing up in Brooklyn. My mother was, I think, right from the beginning, a very inept parent. She and my biological father were married 10 years. He was the good parent, the one who fed me, took care of me. And when they divorced, according to state law, she got full custody. She was an addict, sex, drugs, rock and roll, alcohol, anything that could magnetize her and pull her into its arena, she pursued. And somewhere along the line, she happened to remarry a very famous, well-educated doctor, 25 years or so her senior. And so my childhood was really mixed. I was primarily raised by her parents, who were immigrants, my grandfather from London, my grandmother from Poland, tiny 350 square foot apartment in Brooklyn, very, very modest means to grow up. Incredible people with good values and a wonderful, stable home with them. But living with my mother was a completely different story. So she had me at 21. She was never into parenting. When I lived under her roof with her, she would forget to feed me. She'd forget to come home. She'd forget to pick me up after school. Just completely unreliable. And when she married into this other world, this Manhattan world, to a man she deeply loved, who had two children by adoption, who are my sister and brother, she transformed. And what I learned about her at that point was she was incredibly willing to self-educate. So if she had to learn about opera, she learned about opera. If she had to learn about Wedgwood, she learned about Wedgwood. Whatever it was, she was intelligent. And that was an eye-opener for me. It was really the first time I saw something good in her, that she had an intellectual side I had never seen, and that she had the self-drive to be curious and to learn. So that was a good moment. But a few short years later, my adopted father died of a heart attack, and she reverted to drugs again. This time, harder drugs, more sinister people in her world. And the night before I came to college, I was leaving for college, packing, listening to the Rolling Stones. She walked in my room and said, "I'm not good at this mother thing. I really don't want to do it. You're a good kid. You'll have a good life. Good luck tomorrow." And by the way, I didn't pay her tuition.
Oh,
And I was in shock.
Wow.
I was an out-of-state student for the University of Vermont, which at the time was, I think, in-state tuition was like $450, and out-of-state tuition was, let's guess, $10,000 a semester. Both my grandparents had passed away at this time. I have both my biological parents are only children, so no aunts, no uncles, no other grandparents, no one to turn to. I called my sister and said, can you get me to Vermont? She figured out rides to get me to UVM. And that was the break. And I never saw my mother again.
Wow.
Wow. And you were
So
going to college at 16, so clearly you had skipped a couple of grades along the way.
yeah, I skipped eighth and I started kindergarten at 4.
Ah, wow.
Yeah. And I came to UVM pre-med. I did not know there was a physical therapy department. That all was by chance that I fell into physical therapy literally. Um, but I describe, when we talk about me being emancipated minor, I was a fake emancipated minor. So I'll just put that out there. I had walked across campus after unpacking, and I was looking for a grown-up because I was 16. So, if you need help, what do? You look for a grown-up. So I walked across campus, and Judy knows I found Huck Gutman.
Mm.
And he was an English professor at the time. He's just walking across campus, and I snagged him, and I'm like, hi, I need a grown-up. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I need a grown-up. So, I kind of blurted out what had happened, and he walked me to financial aid. And
Ah,
at financial aid, I met the man I call angel number one, Roger Summers, who at the time was a 24-year-old financial aid counselor and went on to become the first VP of Student Affairs man of color and my mentor forever. And part of Roger's plan was to have me become an in-state student. In order to do that, I had to become an emancipated minor.
ah.
So I didn't know how that happened. So I hopped a bus one day and went back to New York City. I knew I had to go to surrogate's court. And I met angel number 2. And that was a woman named Mrs. Reardon. She was secretary of the court. And I walked in and I said, I'm here. I need to be declared an emancipated minor. And she said, oh, honey, it doesn't work that way. You have to find your parents. They have to give up parental rights. We have to have a private investigator. You have to have a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. I said, I can't do any of that. And she said, well, what do you need it for? And I said, I need it to get in-state status and be eligible for financial aid. She pulls out a piece of letterhead from the court. She puts it in her old typewriter. She types up a letter that says something like, Paula Oppenheim appeared before a surrogate's court in New York on this day, asking to become an emancipated minor. The court finds no fault with that.
Oh my, brilliant.
She signed it. She put the seal of New York on it. She put it in an envelope. She gave it to me and said, honey, you and I both know this means nothing.
But UVM didn't know that.
I took it back on the bus. I handed it back to Roger. He looked at it. He put it in my folder and he checked the box.
Nice.
Wow.
So I'm a fake emancipated minor, but I still had to fend for myself and live on my own. Yes.
Wow. Boy, that must have been really scary.
It was terrifying. I think the worst moment for me was Christmas break.
Yeah, where do you
So
go?
all my friends left and I faked having a place to go. My plan was to hide in the dorm over Christmas break, guessing that there would be no food and the heat would be turned off. And I kept telling people, have a great Christmas. See you in January. I'm catching the last bus home. Have a great New Year's, and playing the part. And the first morning that I got up with my shower kit to go to the bathroom, the custodian is there cleaning the dorm and he sees me and I see him and I'm sure he's going to give me away and I have nowhere to go. And what he did instead was he came back with a basket of food and blankets.
Wow.
And he showed up every day with food. And
Wow.
I don't think he spoke English.
Angel number 3, huh?
Angel number 3. He never gave me away. And eventually, sometime during Christmas break, my Vermont roommate realized where I was and said, just come to our house. And that's what I did. So I didn't have to spend a month or 6 weeks hiding in the dorm.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow.
Well, that is amazing. So I'm, just based on the context of the book I wrote and this book that the guy wrote, who we're going to see, we hope, next week.
Yeah,
I'm curious, what are the ramifications? And this is a very general question. What are the
sure.
ramifications for you of being estranged from your mom that way? And how has that affected you? And I know that's a very broad question.
Well, it's had huge implications. I think that part of it was I had to rely on myself alone to get through college. And that was daunting. I think I learned a few things about myself I didn't realize. One is probably resilience is my superpower.
Mm.
Say.
It's not something I think a kid realizes about themselves, but I have by nature a pretty optimistic attitude, and I never thought I'd fail. I never thought I would lose the battle. Not for 1 minute did I ever question that I would graduate. And when I graduated, Roger was the only one there at the bottom of the stairs with a dozen roses. No one was at my graduation.
Mm.
And he made it special for me. I graduated in 4 years as a physical therapist, including all my internships and rotations, which were out of
Wow.
state. I started UVM Rescue while I was there, and I started ROTC for women. I also helped design the Living Learning Center. So it was not, and I also worked 3 jobs all through college. So the sacrifice for me was that I didn't go to medical school. I could not get the grades to go to medical school, but I learned about myself, the invaluable lesson that I could thrive, not just survive. I've never thought of myself as a survivor, although different people have referred to me that way. I just never put that together with me. I learned that my intelligence can solve a lot of problems, that skipping 8th grade was a cool thing to say, but the implication of that was I was smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's something Roger taught me. Roger was the one that said, you can do this, you know how to do this. And I combined that with lessons my grandparents taught me. They never said, you're the smartest girl in your class, you're the most beautiful girl we've ever seen.
Mm.
It was modest compliments. You can do this. You're going to work hard. You will be fine. Like everything was very believable, very modest and moderate in
They were
their.
expressing faith in you, basically.
Yes, that's a
Yeah.
great way to put it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Now,
And
where was your biological father through this?
great question. I didn't know.
Oh, so
I
you
found
no
him,
contact.
no contact, no idea where he was. He was forced to give up parental rights somewhere in the 60s, and that's why I could get adopted by my doctor father.
Ah.
And I found him at 19 through happenstance. It was just a freak situation where I actually ran into a cousin, and I happened to wear a gold 4-leaf clover with my birth name on it and my birth date and pounds and ounces and time I was born. And I met my cousin, and he said, oh, my mom has a clover just like that. And her sister
Ah.
has a clover just like that. And I said, yeah, my grandma used to have a clover just like that. And he's like, yeah, it's a family thing. What's your name on the clover? And I told him, and he's like, that's my mother's maiden name.
Wow.
So we
Wow.
called his mom, who turned out to be my aunt. And through her, we found my grandfather, her brother, and then my father. And it was fascinating because he is the polar opposite of my adopted father. So to think that these two completely opposite men, one totally uneducated Brooklyn cab driver his entire life, could marry the same woman that an educated doctor with a master's degree, a law degree, who spoke 8 languages, that they could marry the same woman is stunning to me, and
Yeah.
probably another episode worth, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it. That resilience you describe. I mean, when you were talking about your mom as someone who was able to reinvent herself and learn, and you saw that clearly, you inherited some of that. Is that your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time not hating her,
Mm,
Yeah.
because
yeah.
I've spent the bulk of my life hating her, and we can get back to that with the estrangement discussion, but um, I'd say for decades I couldn't forgive her.
Uh-huh.
And it was really our rabbi that helped me try to find kernels of goodness in her. And I worked really hard. In fact, one of the things that was gifted to me was a golden pomegranate. And that sounds super weird. It's on my bookshelf. But the one best memory I have of my mother was in about 4th grade. She woke me up in the middle of the night holding a pomegranate, and she said, I have to cut this open. You have to see what's in it. And I remember thinking as a kid, it's a school night. Like, why are you waking me up in the middle of the night? Well, I'm sure she was probably high or drunk or something. But anyway, this pomegranate was just a moment of wonder for me. And then we ate it.
Mm.
And it's like the one great memory I held on to forever about her. And so a few years ago, someone gave me a golden pomegranate.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
sweet.
Yeah.
That's
Of course, the book you're writing with your daughter on creative parenting, again, sounds like you came by that naturally as well.
Well, that gets back to, I think, the last question you asked me, how did this affect me? I had a first marriage, and in that marriage, my in-laws at the time consistently said, she'll never be able to be a mother. Look at the example she's lived with. She'll
Um,
probably be an addict. She'll probably be a drunk. And my husband, to some degree, bought into that. And it was just fighting upstream all the time that I was not going to be that person.
Mhm.
When I finally wanted to be a mother, it was terrifying
mm,
because I didn't feel I had a mother. I didn't feel I could even figure out how to mother. And I had a wonderful therapist who took me through this exercise where she said, I bet you don't have one mother. I bet you have many mothers.
mm,
And she had me write short stories on all the women who had mothered me.
wow.
Wow.
So,
What an
starting with
interesting
my
exercise.
grandmother and my teacher, Mrs. Freed, in 4th grade, and Mrs. Schechter, and all these wonderful women who taught me how to core an apple or make mashed potatoes or do some of the Seder foods, or just hundreds of things. And it turned out I had at least 30 mothers.
Wow. Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, and now it sounds also, in addition to your mother's, addictions, that there was mental illness there.
Yes, my sister would know way more about that. She's a therapist, than
Mm.
I will ever understand. But I've been asked numerous times if she had borderline personality disorder or bipolar,
Right,
and I don't know.
right. You can't diagnose her, in retrospect, but did that also play into your mind? Like, what if I inherited this mental illness? No. Okay.
Never.
Mhm.
There was a time in high school where she was seeing a psychiatrist, and she took me to his office because she wanted me committed. And it took him, I don't know, 4 minutes
Mhm.
to, she brought my report card, and he asked me a bunch of questions. I was also a Girl Scout at that time, and I was in multiple clubs and captain of volleyball, and I was a school officer. It was my usual leadership stuff.
Overachiever.
Yeah. And
Obvious
he
failure to function there, right? Yes.
right. And
Yeah.
he said to her, you're projecting. Like, she's not the one that needs to be committed. And she was really frustrated. And he was like, why? What's the problem here? She's got great grades. She's leading in her high school. What's your issue?
Yeah.
And it was projection. But I also remember her parents telling me they didn't have more children because she was so impossible to manage, even as a 3-year-old,
Oh,
that
wow.
they
Wow.
just couldn't do it. So maybe she had oppositional disorder. I don't know, but
Yeah.
you know, she had something.
Yeah, so even as young as 3, they knew that there were problems.
Yes.
Wow.
I've often commented to folks, there's nature and there's nurture, and clearly I'm in the nurture business, not the nature business. I, work with couples as a therapist,
Mhm.
and yet the longer I've done this work, the more respect I have for nature. It's like, yeah, she was born wired in such a way that she was going to be a very difficult kid to parent and have a hard time in a variety of ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's so interesting about that, Bruce, is when I met my biological father, we had so many traits that were alike,
Well, sure.
and neither one of us had ever thought of that. And the funniest one to figure out was we both prefer 2 hours to get ready in the morning. We like to have our coffee. We like to look at the news. We like to, hang out a little bit. We are not people to rush in the morning. And
Mhm.
just to find that out, because my mother could literally throw back the covers, smoke a cigarette, grab a cup of coffee, and run for the train.
Mm.
And that is the complete opposite of me and my father.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah.
That was really interesting, was to see that I could be apart from him from age 4 to 19. And he really had no role in helping me grow up. And yet I was like him in many ways.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I am curious to ask, how did you come around to forgiving your mother? You mentioned you started to tell us a little bit about that. Could you tell us more about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure I totally have.
Mm-hmm.
With the rabbi's help, I've learned to find the good in her. Um, every person has some good in them, and hers is just harder to find.
Mm-hmm.
If you come to my house, one of the things you see is artwork. She was a painter, and I have many of her paintings. My kids have her paintings. She's made them exquisitely crafted doll houses, that where she's handmade the furniture, hand painted the wallpaper, like they're museum quality doll houses. She sent them to them, learning that she had grandchildren on Facebook. She sent their doll houses to the UVM alumni office because she didn't
Wow.
know where we were.
Ah.
Um, so I've tried to forgive the parts of her that were out of her control, her diseases.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hold those things against her. The parts I can't forgive were the abuse,
Mm.
the the way that she failed to parent, in basic ways, not feeding me, not picking me up. I don't think we ever had a mother-daughter conversation about anything. I have no memory of how she thought about the world or politics or history, nothing like that. So those things are just blank. They're missing. They're like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that you lost and you know you're never going to find, but you sort of see the whole picture. So I can't say that I've forgiven her in total, but I've accepted her with her flaws. I don't really put up with people just trashing her.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some family discussions because I firmly believe that there's good in everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tried to find a window into that good. And for me, I would credit Rabbi. He's like, you can't forget the bad things that were done to you. And sometimes you can't forgive the bad things that were done to you, but you could forgive the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she could change her genetics or whatever was her underlying disease. I can't fault her with that.
Yeah.
So from the time she basically said we're done when you were 16, And then she's sending you these dollhouses periodically over the years. Did you have any contact with her personally or directly, or try to?
Well, that's also very interesting. I never initiated anything. So I was on bed rest for 7 months, pregnant with twins. And that's a whole other episode.
Who are two of your three delightful children, by the way.
Yes, yes. My older one showed up just fine, and then the other
Yeah.
two were.
He's delightful too, but yeah.
Everybody's good.
Yeah.
So during that period of time, which was around 1991, she washed up on a beach in California. She was found by a physician who was on a morning run. He found her unconscious, put her in residential treatment in California. And during her rehabilitation, she started writing to me through the alumni office.
Mm.
And initially, her notes sounded just like the 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
The amends letters, and she said in those letters everything I'd ever wanted to hear, anything I'd ever hoped she'd say came through in those letters. Somewhere around 60 days after I started getting those letters, they started to turn mean again and increasingly aggressive, to the point where she was threatening that she would kill me if I wouldn't let her see her grandchildren.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
So when I was off of bed rest, I drove all of the letters, her letters and my letters, to the Brattleboro retreat. And I met with the medical director there, who's a psychiatrist, and I laid all the letters end to end in chronological order. And he was able to look at the letters and say, okay, here's where she was in residential treatment. Here's where she was going to meetings. Here's where she stopped.
Yeah.
And
had you written back to her?
yes.
So you had, yeah, okay.
Using the alumni office
Yeah.
as the address.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd had no contact up until that time, absolutely nothing, no letters, no correspondence, nothing. And I never tried to reach out to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea where she was. So I didn't know if she was in New York, California. I had no idea where on the planet she was. And no one I knew had heard from her, no relative, literally no one. So his advice to me was, you have to cut this relationship off immediately. And you're just going to write a simple note that says, this relationship is not working for me, and sign my name. No sincerely, no good luck to you, literally nothing. And no further correspondence came from me. Several years later, she did try to call the house. I don't know how she got our number, but she called the house, and Evan, who was a kid at the time, our youngest son, he answered the phone and told her to take a hike, and we never heard from her again. And then I used to Google her obituary. So every time I was on hold, I would Google her obituary, and one day it showed up.
Oh.
And I called the mortuary, and the mortuary put me in touch with the medical examiner. And I was able to ask the medical examiner for her medical history, explain the situation. He said, I can't give you that, but I can tell you what we didn't find. And that's how I found out. He's like, we didn't find diabetes drugs. We didn't find cancer drugs. We didn't find any signs of amputation or major surgery.
Mm-hmm.
No mastectomy scars, because I wanted to know if she had breast cancer. So
Uh-huh.
it was fascinating how, and he called me within minutes, literally within minutes, to give me whatever health history he could.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was very nice.
Do you know how she died?
Heart attack.
Ah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when did that happen?
2009.
Ah.
And
Wow.
how old was she at the time?
I think 76.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that, to forgive her, when I've written about forgiveness, I've taken to describing two different ways of using the word forgiveness, a sort of narrower way and a broader way. And I'm a fan of the narrower way. And what I mean by that is, the narrower way of describing forgiveness is, it actually doesn't matter whether the person deserves it or doesn't deserve it. It's entirely internal. In other words, well, and you were describing elements of that as you were talking about it, Paula. You were saying you can accept, in effect, I don't think you used these exact terms, but she was doing the best she could in a lot of ways, given who she was, given her particular wiring and whatever mental illnesses she was dealing with. She was doing the best she could, and that's the sense in which, well, okay, I don't have to be angry anymore. That's, I say, the narrow way. The broader way of describing forgiveness is when people are describing forgiveness as having to do with their relationship with the person. Well, I forgive you, meaning I will restore my relationship. I don't like to use that way because I like to
Right.
separate. That's a whole different issue. It sounds, in my lexicon, you forgave her, but didn't trust her.
Correct.
And you realize, okay, forgiving is one thing. You don't have to walk around burdened with anger, but you can then make some, intelligent choices about whether it makes sense to be in relationship with that person.
Right. I could never be in a relationship with her,
Mhm.
even after her death. Like
Yeah.
I can't put her name on a wall, right? Because
Uh,
I don't want to see her name every time I walk into temple. There are ways that I don't want to go to her grave. Like a
mhm.
lot of the traditions that we have in Judaism that I know I should do, I just can't get there.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
yet
it's
you have reminders in your house. You have her artwork, you have those beautiful doll houses.
right,
So you do have that. And I
right.
think, that shows the good side of her, the creative side, that was her way of expressing her love.
And those also were done in her sober moments, right? In
Yeah.
the periods of her life where she was clean and sober, when she was happy, when she was learning, when she was trusting, when she was in relationship and had good friends and a good marriage, or was a student of art or any of those things. So having those things around remind me of the periods of her life that were healthy.
Yeah.
Mm,
And even though they may be a small percent of her whole time on earth, I'd rather remember those times than all the rest of it. But
mhm,
I love your idea, Bruce, of thinking of it as narrow
mhm,
because I would never trust her. I would never want to restore a relationship with her. I would not trust her with my children.
mhm,
Um, but to be able to forgive her in light of her diseases and her miswiring and
mhm.
other things, I think that was important.
This may be a slightly impertinent question, and feel free to answer it or not, but I mean, it's not that impertinent. I just find myself wondering if you observe her yard site. Do you say Kaddish for her on her yard site? Yeah.
No, I just, it's hard and I wrestle with it all the time
Mm-hmm.
because I'm her only child.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that obligation part where I feel like I should, but
Mm.
I just can't get there.
I feel I should probably explain for our listeners who aren't Jewish that yahrzeit just means the anniversary of someone's death, and it is a custom in Jewish tradition that children of someone who is, on the anniversary of their parent's death would say the Kaddish prayer, which is a prayer that is associated with that.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But I do for both my fathers.
Aha. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, what else should you be telling us about, Paula? I mean, we could do multiple episodes on fascinating things. Maybe we will at some point, but I'm curious, what would you like to add at this point?
I think that one of the parts we miss in this story is about the child. And when other adults come into the life of a child who has a situation like this, those other adults don't know what to do.
Mhm.
And everybody needs their angels. And if if the custodian had not chosen to break the rule, I would have had a completely different outcome.
Hmm.
And one of the questions that's been asked by many people is would adults nowadays break those rules? Would adults
We're having
nowadays
some
step forward to
technical
someone?
problems, having a little bit of technical problems, and I'm going to invite you to repeat that because I think it's really important. So you could just repeat, would adults nowadays take it from there?
Yeah, would adults nowadays break the rules and step forward to help a child, a young adult
Still having technical problems, but I think we
to
got the idea. Yeah.
succeed,
Yeah.
right?
That's a great question. A lot of adults nowadays,
And
yeah, go ahead.
many people have said to me, adults nowadays probably the rule or step forward. You wouldn't have a Roger Summers except the emancipated minor letter.
Right.
Mhm.
They would say, oh, this isn't really accurate. It's not legal. We can't take it, right? He
Yeah.
didn't do that. And so my life would not be what it is today had those three angels not done what they felt was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think things are a lot more by the book these days. Although I tend to think that perhaps um, an earlier intervention, somebody might have stepped in earlier in your life, and possibly you could have ended up in foster care.
And would that have been better? I mean, given
Yeah.
how it turned out, it's hard to say that would have been better.
Well, I went to live with my grandmother and grandfather in fourth grade. There was
Mhm.
actually a murder in our apartment building, and so I never went back. The
Wow.
neighborhood
Wow.
was just recently written up by the New York Times as the fastest changing neighborhood in all of America. So in the few blocks I lived in Brooklyn, it went from being very, very middle class Jewish to Caribbean in less than 20 years. Our brand new synagogue became a Baptist church in 17 years.
Mm.
Wow.
So the neighborhood changed rapidly, and our uh, building had a murder during the day. And from that day on, I went to live with my grandparents in another, not very far away, but another part of Brooklyn. I think that the other thing we miss with kids is seeing the strength in our children. And one of the real role models I have these days is David Hogg. So one of the survivors of a school shooting
Oh, yeah.
who's now taken gun control as his major platform. I hope someday he runs for office, but I see in him resilience. And I think we miss that in our kids. We look for our kids to be happy
Mhm.
and, to be respectful and to learn trust, but we don't teach them how to bounce back. We don't teach them how to become resilient adults. And I think that's something we should think more about.
Yeah. I think it was the ability of those angels in your life to see that let them say, we don't have to worry about what the rules tell us to do in this circumstance. This kid's got potential and we can have faith in
Right.
her. And that's what
So do you
carried
think
me through.
resiliency is something that can be taught, or do you think it's some kids just have it and some don't?
I think it's a mix. I think some kids have it and some don't, but I think we can reinforce it. I think it's the idea is when you fall down, you get back up. And if you need a hand to get back up, give them the hand,
Mhm.
but they got to get back up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's the stuff that is a lot talked about a lot in education these days, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. That a growth mindset is the claim of people who do research on that is teachable. And you could say that's basically teaching resilience.
Mhm.
It's saying, yeah, it is possible if you put in effort, you can actually grow. You can learn stuff that you didn't know. You can develop skills you didn't have.
right. I also want to credit my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Schechter, noticed that I never came to school with milk money and I rarely had lunch with me. So
Mhm.
no money for school lunch, no money for milk, no lunch. Very quickly into the school year, she said, oh my gosh, my husband made 2 sandwiches today and 2 pieces of fruit. Can you stay at lunchtime and help me with the board? And we'll clean up the classroom and I'll give you this extra sandwich. Well, every day her husband made an extra sandwich and a piece of fruit. It was amazing.
You've
I
got his
never
mouth
caught on.
verklempt at this moment.
Yeah. I never caught on. And then when I went to fifth grade, I got put into her best friend's class, Mrs. Freed. Mrs. Freed's husband made 2 sandwiches every day and an extra piece of fruit. So for 2 years, I had lunch and I never caught on to what was happening.
Wow.
And
Our
then,
teacher's wonderful.
yes, and it's things like that. Like no one made me feel bad that the clothes I wore every day, my grandmother hand sewed from sheets. And
Mm.
everything I had rickrack and colored buttons because it's the only way she could differentiate my clothes. And the
Mhm.
only time I had actual clothes was for school pictures.
Wow.
And I wore my Girl Scout uniform too many days because those were the clothes that I had. And I never felt bad about it. No one ever said, why do you wear white clothes all the time? Or why do all
Uh-huh.
your dresses have rickrack? You know, my
Mhm.
grandmother was a seamstress, but she didn't own a sewing machine. So
Mm.
everything was
Wow.
answered.
Wow. That just that phenomenon that not only did they give you lunch, but they made a point of respecting your dignity. You know,
Exactly.
it's just an amazing, it is very moving. As I say, we're both sitting here for Clem. So,
And they gave me things to do, you know,
Mhm.
can't eat for free. I had to wash the blackboards and get the
Right.
books ready, and like I had projects. So
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
you know, it was important. And during college, I held 3 jobs my freshman year. I cleaned faculty apartments, I babysat, and I did have a sewing machine. And I sewed the hems for every boy that would pay $1 to have his pants sewed or a patch made or whatever. So I did all of those, and I had a work study job. And I still managed to do something as important as, you know, help start a rescue squad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for doing this,
So
Paula.
you're welcome. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me. I was nervous. I've
You,
never, I've only told this story out loud once, and that was the Story Slam, and I won the first prize.
yeah, I
It's
can see why.
the rules from the moth,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
and you've got 5 minutes to do it.
Yeah.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Well, we're so glad that you
Well,
shared it with us and in our series on betrayals and estrangements and forgiveness. So thanks for being part of that.
You're welcome.
Welcome back. I hope you're not as verklempt as we were.
or maybe you
Or
are.
maybe it's a good thing that you are. So it was quite the touching story, and like Bruce said in the intro, a story, and we talked about of resilience and
Hmm.
just amazing,
Yeah.
amazing, and the ability to forgive and to get past hurts.
Yeah, and for folks who, if you haven't read my book yet, hint hint, which is available anywhere books are sold, Betrayal and Forgiveness is the name of the book. We talked about that sense of forgiveness as I define it, and I've said in the interview I've taken to sort of talking about the narrow interpretation and the broad interpretation, and I'm in favor of the narrow interpretation of forgiveness, which is to say it's an internal process. You can forgive somebody who doesn't deserve it.
Right.
And Paula's story of how she was able to forgive her mother in the way she could was all about that. She could see, well, given who she was doing the best she could. That didn't mean that she felt in any way safe to have a relationship with her, and in fact didn't.
Right.
But the idea that you can forgive someone and then you can figure out what you want to do with the relationship, that's central to my book. I read a lot about that in the book. So do please check out the book. Let us know if you would like us to cover any particular topics. Judy, how can people do that?
What a great question. You can go to our website, ctn7, that's the numeral 7.com, ctn7.com, and you can either write to us, you can suggest guests, you can suggest topics, you could even suggest yourself to be a guest on our program.
And in fact, if you want to do that, there's a link on ctn7.com in the podcast tab. If you scroll down there, you'll see there's a link to our scheduling app. So if you want to schedule a time to be interviewed, go ahead and sign up. And in the process of that, you'll be asked, well, what would you like to be interviewed about? That's how we'll know, would you be an appropriate guest for us? And by golly, I'll bet you would. If you think you would, I'll bet you would. And you never know, but
You never know.
go ahead, surprise us. So until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.